Welcome to Stupid versus the Spread, college football, week 11. So we're going to recap week 10. And then today's topics will include picks for this coming week, as there always are, discussion of the games. But instead of storylines, we're mainly sticking to discussion about the college football playoff, which the picture is starting to form. Let's get into it. So, week 10, college football was probably, I would argue, the most consequential week for college football playoff picture in the history of the college football playoff, in which four teams play each other. I don't know that you would disagree, Mike. Both with undefeated Tennessee and Georgia playing each other, Georgia handedly beating Tennessee, covering the spread, and then a thriller of a game where LSU was at home against Alabama and won in overtime. Chip Kelly goes for two after scoring a touchdown after Alabama had scored a touchdown in overtime, kicked a field goal, PAT. So he went for two to win the game or lose the game. He obviously got the 2-point conversion, so Alabama won. LSU won. So LSU storms the field, essentially knocking Alabama out of playoff contention as we see it so far, unless something incredibly radical happens, which I don't think it will. So, looking at the current college football playoff picture, we have Georgia ranked number one, Ohio State ranked number two, Michigan ranked number three, TCU ranked number four, Tennessee five, Oregon six, LSU seven, USC eight, Alabama nine, Clemson 10, and Mississippi State 11. I stop around there because
Ole Miss
reasonably, yeah, Ole Miss.
is
Um,
11. You said Mississippi State.
I'm sorry, Ole Miss is 11. Yes.
I would
Um,
add UCLA in there at 12. I think if you're the point you're going to make is what I think you're about to make is then
yes, which is that is ostensibly the teams remaining in contention for the college football playoff. Um,
UNC as a one-loss ACC champ.
UNC, yeah, Utah, I would say is probably out. Penn State probably out. Um, NC
I
State
I
probably
say
out, having lost to
I say
Clemson.
that I say that sort of facetiously because it's very unlikely to happen. Because then they would need a lot of UNC would need a ton of things to happen. But
Yeah, yeah. So ostensibly, the teams that are still really, really in it right now
yeah,
are obviously the top four, and then I would argue Tennessee, Oregon, LSU, USC. I think,
and
uh,
that's what I think you have to add UCLA in there.
yeah, because basically those, I would argue that those teams technically control their destiny, and here's obviously why. If you believe the college football playoff committee when they say conference championships don't matter, which I don't, um, then at least Ohio State and Michigan have to play each other at the last regular season game of the season. TCU this week, which we'll talk about later, plays Texas. TCU is actually not favored in that game, even though they're undefeated, going
Seven,
against a three-loss Texas team.
7 point dogs. Yeah.
Yeah. So there's a lot in contention, right? And then you got to consider Tennessee just got beat by Georgia, so that means Tennessee is ostensibly out of the SEC championship game because then Tennessee and Georgia are both in the same division in that conference, which leaves you ostensibly Oregon, who could sneak in, LSU, who could, well, I wouldn't say sneak in. Oregon has played very, very well. TCU, I'm sorry, LSU, who, if they somehow pull off a SEC title, would be probably in contention. USC, if they win out. So those are the teams that kind of have the pick of their lot and their own destiny. I would say maybe Clemson too, if they ran the rest of the table. Although I don't think that many people are very high on Clemson just because of their strength of schedule. I Let's start with the simple, Mike. Who do you see as the final top four in the college football playoff? Who's our four teams that we're going to see compete for the title?
I right now it's I think it's Georgia. I still think Ohio State although we could talk about that towards the end of our wrap up. I am so in a pretzel of this Ohio State Michigan game and how it's going to go. But I still think Ohio State, like very, very razor thin knife edge sort of confidence that they're going to win out. And then I think Tennessee makes it in, and I think there's one, and I think the other one loss team will be USC. And
Okay.
I, and that may be a hot take. It's just when I look across the board at the teams that I think have the quarterback play, the offensive talent, the talent across the board to handle their remaining schedule, and then in USC's case to win that conference championship they desperately need in order to really finish their resume, and it will be over a one-loss Oregon team most likely. And in Tennessee's case, I think if they win out convincingly, I think the committee will probably overlook their loss to at Georgia in a hostile environment, even though they didn't play particularly well at all. Um, but I think that's all. TCU is kind of the linchpin for whether or not we get any sort of real chaos down the stretch here, because right now, if TCU wins out, and possibly even if they only have one loss as a Big 12 champ, they're still in. The winner of the Pac-12, if they have one loss, I think leapfrogs Clemson no matter what. But just because of the way Clemson looked this weekend and the way they've looked in the back half of their schedule, assuming Clemson wins the ACC, which is not a gimme considering who they have left. Even for their schedule is not particularly difficult. They just don't. Nothing on in the way that they played right now says that they're capable of handling it convincingly.
Yeah.
And so I think what the College Football Playoff Committee is really rooting for is that the SEC West doesn't screw this up for them, because the biggest chaos here is either LSU or Ole Miss running the table, going to the SEC championship game. Ole Miss would need LSU to take another loss,
Mm-hmm.
and then beating Georgia, because that throws
Everything.
everything into
A blender of
yeah.
well,
That's
again, assuming like I think you and I both do that the committee does in fact take the championship like into consideration, like the
yeah,
championship
because
conference
well,
championship.
but I think the problem there, and that's the death scenario, because you would have a one loss, like everything else holds, right? You have a one loss Tennessee, a one loss Georgia, and neither of them are SEC champions, but they're both better than the SEC champion. So who do you put in? And you can't put. There's no way you can make the argument that two non-champion SEC teams go in over every other conference champ. I don't
Right.
think that the college football committee, if they're concerned about the national marketability of the sport, can realistically do that. So, but then who do you leave out? I would assume Tennessee gets left out in that situation, because you value the win over Georgia and the conference championship more than you do Tennessee playing really well down the stretch. But I that's the worst case scenario for them, because no matter who they put in over Tennessee and the SEC are both going to scream that Tennessee's better than that team. And they might be right. Um, so it's a question of that would be the worst case scenario. I think things get murkier. Tennessee's going to probably get they're probably going to have an argument they should be any way you slice it. Um, but I think if there's at least two other, beside assuming Ohio State or Michigan wins out, whichever one wins out, wins the Big Ten. I think out of the three remaining Power Five conferences, I think two of them are going to have one loss champions. And if you assume that, then the playoff scenarios are pretty cut and dry. The only way it gets muddy is if one of those other teams has, even remotely muddy, is if one of those other teams has two losses.
Mm-hmm.
But then I think it's easy because you just put Tennessee in. Um, but I think that SEC West champ really, really screws everything up.
Yeah, I so I am not sold on the fact or the possibility that the committee would um, throw out either Ohio State or Michigan if they both run the table, go undefeated, and then um, play a close game in that final game of the regular season,
Also,
and then go to a championship game and then basically do the same thing over where both of them come out with a win. Um, I will say, looking at TCU's schedule, and you know, spoiler alert here, I'm going to pick TCU this weekend over Texas on the spread at least. But TCU has the following games over the next 3 weeks. They're at Texas, they're at Baylor, which is no joke because Baylor's a very good team,
mhm.
and then they have Iowa State at home, which is not easy either. I could very well see TCU dropping to Texas and then maybe spiraling out at Baylor or Iowa State.
And then
Um,
it's important to keep in mind that they would also have a Big 12 championship game after that,
correct.
assuming that
Who I presume would be, let's look at the standings.
I would assume it's K State.
It would depend on whether Baylor or Texas beat TCU essentially for who plays that game. Assuming TCU does not lose to both,
Yeah,
in
there's a
which
bunch
case
of
Baylor and Texas would leapfrog TCU.
there's like a crazy spider web in the Big 12 of who could possibly make the championship game opposite TCU, but realistically, it's probably a team they're going to have difficulty like beating easily. So they basically have 4 games left if you count the championship game, and 3 of them are very easily losable.
Correct. So here's the problem too is that if you're a one-loss TCU team, you probably, given the rankings and who you've played, you probably don't get as much respect as Ohio State or Michigan. And I've said on record that I think Michigan's the better team this year. It wouldn't shock me if I'm proven right. Wouldn't shock me if I'm proven wrong. But I think when you're looking at this, I think Georgia's pretty much locked in. I think it would take a lot for Georgia at this point to not be in the college football playoff. For my scenario, I'm going to safely assume that they maintain their number one seed. Um, of the two, Ohio State and Michigan, I don't think they would want them um, playing each other. So I could see one of them keeping the number 2 rank and another dropping to the number 4 rank. But I think TCU will probably lose at least one of these upcoming games, maybe even multiples. And then looking at the schedule, I kind of like Oregon to make the college football playoff. So Oregon has to play Washington at home this week. They stay at home next week, where Utah comes to town, and then they finish up at Oregon State. With that, if they win all those games, Oregon will have played the following teams.
Well,
And
they also have a Pac-12 championship date against either UCLA or USC.
correct. So ostensibly between Oregon, USC, and UCLA, whoever wins that. But if Oregon runs the table here and then wins the championship game, they will have beaten in the regular season UCLA, Cal, ranked Washington team or ranked Utah team. Um,
Oregon State's a good
at the
win.
time, BYU team who we thought was
BYU,
going
yep.
to be good. A Washington State team that was good at the time. The only significant loss would be the first week of the season when they got crushed by Georgia, which would make for a great storyline on a rematch where they're ranked number 4. So I think Oregon, if they run the table, obviously TCU runs the table. There's no question TCU's in it as an undefeated team, but I just don't know that that's going to happen. I know a lot of people haven't been respecting TCU early on. I feel like I've not been a hater, but I think the next 3 games that they have are very, very difficult. It's going to be very hard for them to go undefeated, and as soon as you have one loss in this kind of playoff picture, even if you have a conference championship, you're looking now you're at the whim of the committee for, hey, who has the strength of schedule, because there will be multiple one loss teams with a nice feather in their cap for conference championship. Um, that really could throw a wrench in the plans if you're a TCU fan of TCU making the college football playoff. So I think the way I see it going, Michigan, Ohio State, Georgia, all in, probably, as long as they all run the table. And then obviously, again, I've talked at nauseum about that game between Michigan and Ohio State, but I think I see Georgia moving into that spot. I like Tennessee. I think they're a good team. I just don't think that if they put Ohio State and Michigan in, you're going to see two SEC and two Big Ten teams. I don't think that's the intention of the committee. I think Georgia would have a statement wins, plural, with a conference championship if they run the table. USC, I could also see sneaking in there. Um, you know, USC's strength of schedule, they wouldn't have that statement win, so they'll have to run the table. But if they run the table, their statement win is going to be at UCLA and then beating Notre Dame. But they did lose to Utah, and they did lose to Utah. So that's the one game that might throw a wrench in that. That's why I see Oregon kind of coming out on top the most.
Yeah, I think that one would settle itself on the field. I think the end game scenarios between USC and Oregon are both are interesting because they're basically the same or similar resumes, except Oregon would need to add a win over Utah, which and we just talked about how difficult TCU's schedule may be for TCU, but I think you can easily make the argument that Oregon's is going to be harder, and you're almost certainly right because TCU has to play. Yes, they have Texas. Yes, they have a Baylor game that's very losable, but Baylor's not ranked. Iowa State is a cakewalk compare, and I think Iowa State is not even arguably worse than Oregon State is. And is that TCU Iowa State game on the road? I don't know.
I believe Iowa State is at home.
Yeah. So either way, but Oregon will have a much tougher time going to Oregon State than TCU will have going to Iowa State, and then in the
No, TCU has Iowa State at home, but they're at Baylor.
okay,
But that's a
so
within Texas matchup. So
yeah,
two within Texas matchups followed by Iowa State.
so I think Oregon's schedule of having Washington at home, they get Utah at home, then they go to Oregon State, and then they have a Pac-12 date against presumably either UCLA or USC or against USC, who are both that's two top 15 teams and three ranked teams in 4 weeks. That's a very difficult end of the run, and clearly the committee respects what they've done so far. So for them, if they win out, then they almost certainly will have redeemed themselves from the first time they played Georgia. Um, I think the problem I think it's going to be difficult for them to win out because as good as Oregon has looked, I don't know that necessarily the competition they've played is the same caliber of what they're about to walk into.
Mm-hmm.
And you can make that argument for USC as well. I just when I, like, and it's stupid to say, but it's Caleb Williams versus Bo Nix, and who do I trust more to go win big games? And I think it's even though Caleb Williams hasn't done it, what I see from him on the field and what I see from that offense and the players he has around him make me think that USC is more likely to do that. And so that's where I think USC's resume will really come on late here because when you look at what they would have to do, they get a bad Colorado team this week, but then they have UCLA, which is a top 15 team. Notre
Mm-hmm.
Dame, as long as they take care of Navy and Boston College, will be a ranked win at the end of the season, presumably
Yep.
a top 20 ranked win. And then if they Oregon more than likely won't fall out of the rankings, even if they lose to even if they lose to two of the three teams. So then they would have another ranked win in their conference championship game. So that's where I get the USC path is pretty simple. I mean, no matter what for these teams, it's simple win out, and you're probably in with the way that everything else falls.
Right.
Um, I think it's interesting that Tennessee is still ranked ahead of Oregon. I think that there's a chance that that means that Tennessee gets in over. I think they'll Oregon will leapfrog them if they win out because of the amount of ranked wins they'll have to compile to do that. But I think it's interesting that Tennessee is ranked ahead of them right now, and I think there's an interesting question to be had here. Even if Michigan goes on the road and beats Ohio State, you talked about how Michigan and Ohio State in a close game, both of them get in. I don't know. Assuming Georgia wins out, I don't see the committee putting Ohio State in over Tennessee at that point. And I think the reason being that if you look at those as very similar, Michigan wins out. They're the number 2 team. Georgia is the number 1 team. Ohio State and Tennessee are eerily similar, but when you look at them, the way that they've played, Tennessee has clearly been the better team. Um,
That's not
as opposed,
unfair. Yeah.
as opposed to Ohio State, especially recently. Um, with a lot, and then you add on that fact that Ohio State would have lost at home to their rival, whereas Tennessee would have gone on the road and lost to the defending national champs. I think it becomes easy to see how the committee would put Tennessee ahead of Ohio State. So, um,
Yeah, look, I don't discount the idea that only one Big Ten team makes it. I think if only one Big Ten team makes it, you'll probably more than likely see two SEC teams. If Tennessee wins out, but doesn't obviously go to the SEC championship, I think they really do have a great um, resume for why they should be in. I would also like to point out that Ole Miss is kind of in a similar situation where if they win out, they'll have a great record, but won't. I don't think Ole Miss can make the SEC. No, they
they
can.
can't
They can.
they can't because LSU's second loss is out of conference. This is the reason why
Right, right, right,
this
right,
is the
right,
reason
right,
why
right.
Bama's out is
Right.
because Bama now has 2 conference losses. They're third in the SEC West behind LSU and Ole Miss. Now that'll settle itself on the field this weekend. If Bama wins, they're back to second place in the West. But if Ole Miss gets by Alabama, they still can't make the SEC title game without help from LSU. So yes, they could end up being a one-loss SEC West team that doesn't make the championship, even though LSU has 2 losses. I still don't think what they do down the stretch is going to be enough for the committee to consider them even over Tennessee, just because Tennessee will have beaten Bama at home. Well, I guess sorry, they'll have both beaten. Um, they'll both have beaten Alabama at home. I don't think that there's a way that Ole Miss can really leapfrog Tennessee at this point based on who they have left. Um,
Right. Oh, I don't think that's
yeah,
really that possible either, especially given strength of schedule. I'm just trying to play out like I could see a world in which Georgia's won. You have like let's say Ohio State doesn't make it, right? And I know that's a very large presumption. I really do think that both Ohio State and Michigan probably at this point have shown their caliber teams to both be in it. But let's say that these two teams play each other ostensibly twice, and we see that one of them is not of the caliber we thought, right? So either one, um, then I think that opens it up for an SEC team to hop in there, a second SEC team. But barring that, I think the committee is more likely to pick a Big 12 or a Pac 12 team to fill that fourth slot, as opposed to doing a two SEC, two Big 10 team kind of combination. Um, and I think the scenario is likely that we'll see a conference championship that has a one loss Michigan or Ohio State versus the other who's undefeated. And then, the outcome of that game really will determine whether both get in or whether, whatever team, if say Michigan beats Ohio State twice, which obviously very hard to do, ostensibly back to back weeks, I think that
no, they
changes the
can't.
narrative.
They're on the same side. That can't happen.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. So more to my point is I don't think a one loss team on either of that side is necessarily disqualifying from the playoffs, given that the um, kind of caliber of teams that we've seen as of late.
Yeah, I think ultimately we know that this comes down to. I think where it gets interesting is if like what does the committee do if TCU stumbles twice, if the Pac-12 winner has 2 losses but Clemson wins out, but not convincingly. I
I,
think that becomes really a weird situation because you would assume, or let's say TCU wins out, but the Pac-12 winner has 2 losses, and now you have Tennessee, the Ohio State Michigan loser, both with 1 loss, and then you have Clemson as a 1 loss. conference champ, but they have
I mean, I hate to say it, they probably put Clemson in, but I don't think they should.
no one. I don't think anyone would think they should. It's just that would be a terrible scenario for the committee
Right,
because
because if TCU loses, now you have a one-loss Ohio State and or Michigan team. Again, we're doing the presumptuous both are in. I I mean, does Oregon deserve less of like I guess you're saying a two-loss Pac-12 team? So yeah, I mean, maybe you would put Tennessee in, but again, we've been saying I don't think they'll put two Big Ten
well, I mean,
and two
your
SEC.
options are put in two SEC teams, put in two Big Ten teams, or put in Clemson, who is a Power Five champion with one loss, but no one believes should be there. It's sort of like what
I
Washington.
don't like that. I
Yeah,
know that's a
it's
possibility. I don't like that.
yeah,
I
that's
would rather Ole Miss at that point.
yeah,
And again, this is like kind of off the cuff, but I would rather see two SEC and two.
yeah. I would too, just for the competitiveness of the games. But I
Mhm.
think to wrap up our discussion here, do you? How do you feel? And we're getting a way ahead, but I really thought about this a lot because this Ohio State Michigan game is going to be huge, obviously for the playoff, assuming they both continue
Mhm.
to march there. And the way that Ohio State looked at Northwestern, I get it. The wind was like 40 miles an hour, and CJ Stroud nobody could throw the football. But you're Ohio State and it's Northwestern. They haven't won a game on American soil this year. Um, like a fact I didn't know until I looked it up. Um, I I don't think it's going to go the same way it went last year, despite the fact that it's trending that way. Just because I think Ohio State is going to play better defensively, and I think Michigan is better offensively, but I think Ohio State's improvements defensively are more than what Michigan has improved offensively.
Okay.
I think what that game like how you feel about that game, I think ultimately is the other side. Is do you think CJ Stroud, and I say you in the metaphorical sense, and does anyone think CJ Stroud is going to show up and be the quarterback he's supposed to be in that game? Because if he is, I think Ohio State wins. Um, almost no matter what, because I think Michigan's going to have just enough of a tough time scoring. Where if because Michigan is not the same team defensively that they were last year. They're good.
Right.
They're just not the same
Not
elite
as good.
two
Correct.
first round pass rusher sort of offensive team that they were last year. And Ohio State has roughly just as good of weapons this year as they had last year. So it's it's going to be really interesting to see how that game unfolds. But and then this is I don't know what to think of Ohio State because I still in the back of my head think they somehow find a way to beat Michigan. But they look so disinterested in some of these games where they sort of sleepwalk through playing teams, even like a game like Penn State on the road where they just look like they don't necessarily care. And
Right.
it's so weird because they have all the talent in the world, but I also don't understand how anyone can say that CJ Stroud is the best quarterback prospect in college football right now. When you look at the way Bryce Petty, or sorry, I keep saying Bryce Petty, Bryce Young willed his team to stay competitive in that game at LSU, despite the fact that he doesn't have a wide receiver that can get open to save his life. And CJ Stroud has wide receivers who do nothing but get open, and he has not consistently been able to find them. I think it really like that game could be like I think it ultimately comes down to him, which is such a weird thing to say. But if CJ Stroud plays really, really well, they win that game. And if he looks the way that he's looked for the past 4-ish weeks, 3-ish weeks, they lose. And so go his draft stock, so go Ohio State's playoff hopes. It all goes away. To me, if he doesn't show up and play out and really show it really be the good guy he was supposed to be this season.
I think if you have a within one touchdown game in the Ohio State Michigan game and both teams score at least 31 points, I think you see both teams get in the college football playoff. I don't think either have. I see what you're saying about specifically that matchup. I don't necessarily disagree, although I will say Ohio State being at home this year, obviously a huge boost. I think it probably matters the most out of all the games that you play. I think it matters the most that game. Um, but I mean, we'll see, right? Like it very well could be that Stroud, steps up. I don't think he's been horrible though. Like Penn State game, they scored 44. He may not have put up the most points in the world because Ohio State really has relied on the running game a little more, which surprised me as to why they didn't score more
Well, that's the
in the
thing that
Northwestern game.
you would think that, but they couldn't run the ball in Northwestern. And if
I
and now
think I
if
think that had to do more with the weather than anything.
I I would tend to agree, but if you can't do it against Northwestern, you're not going to do it against Michigan. I don't care, home, road, in the playoff, on the moon.
I
It,
I am willing to turn a blind eye to the last week where Ohio State only put up 21 in 40-mile-per-hour winds away. You know what I mean? Like
yeah,
if it were home, it would be different. If they come out and they sleepwalk against Indiana, it'll be different. But um, I think that's one of those where you can just kind of like look away. So we'll see. It'll be interesting to see, but we'll
yeah.
see.
I think last point. I think Michigan's hoping that the committee keeps Ohio State where it is.
Absolutely.
I think if you're Harbaugh, you don't want whatever sense of complacency has permeated itself in Ohio State's locker room. You want it to stay there, and to stay there right through when you play them, because
Yeah,
you
yeah.
don't
Well, for
you
2
don't want
points.
the
Well,
go ahead.
no, you please. Sorry, I
You
didn't mean
don't
to.
want the talent at Ohio State to have any incentive to wake up and realize they should be angry.
Correct. I also was going to say if you lose to the number 2 ranked seed in the college football playoff rankings in the regular season, you maybe can get away with being number 4. Like if you
Yeah,
really have otherwise shown it, and I think Michigan has, um, as opposed to like a one-loss TCU or a one-loss, Oregon. Maybe Tennessee would leapfrog them at that point, but again, they still have to play the rest of the games, so we'll see. Um, I will continue this playoff conversation as we get a better picture. Obviously, the 4th of December, so just about a month away. We'll see who winds up in playoff contention as the committee announces it. Let's get into the games. First game we'll talk about. Actually, no noon games on our talk about slate, but there's one or two matchups that are looking pretty good. But first matchup we'll talk about does have implications for the college football playoffs. Alabama at Ole Miss. Ole Miss is plus 12 over under 63.5. It's a 3:30 kick, so it's the SEC weekly kickoff, whatever, on CBS. Um, Mike, do you have a pick for this game? I think it'll be interesting to see how Bama comes out after that LSU loss. Obviously, Bama is almost assuredly removed from playoff contention. So, really, if you're Ole Miss, you're not. So, you do have the opportunity to kind of win out. But do you have a pick for this game?
no, not really. Like the only thing I'll say is that the over is currently the cash on the over is 91% at 63.5. Um, and when you watch Alabama play defense, you sort of understand why. And the fact that it's Lane Kiffin playing at home, you expect this to be a higher scoring game. Alabama's like all we heard on the broadcast this weekend, and like all of Alabama's DBs are going to be playing in the NFL. I don't know why, because they haven't proven they can cover anybody.
Correct. Correct.
And
They're doing the awesome opposite of what Sauce Gardner is doing this year.
yeah, like because like Georgia showed that their DBs they played man most of the game against Tennessee and shut them down. And you would think if they could do that, and before the season, if you looked at the two defenses on paper and said who has the better secondary, you would have said Alabama has the better secondary
Yeah.
easily.
Yeah.
So I don't know what Alabama is doing defensively that is causing this problem, but they can't cover anybody. but besides the point, I think that's like I said, I'm not gonna. It's not on my card this week, but the over I think is the only play here because I'm really like the interesting angle of this game is really what does Alabama look like because this is sort of a unique spot for Saban and this program in that they are out of the college football playoff for all intents and purposes because, like we said, LSU's second loss is out of conference. Alabama has two losses in conference, so LSU would need to lose twice before Alabama could get in the playoff if Alabama wins this game.
Hmm.
So, which is almost certainly not going to happen because I think LSU gets Arkansas a tomato can, and then they get and maybe it's UAB who isn't terrible, and then it's Texas A&M. So they're probably not losing two of those games. So what does Alabama look like? Do they rotate in some of the five stars that they have on the bench? Do they bench some of the older guys? Do you see some guys start to think about maybe not playing and heading for the draft? How cohesive can Saban keep this program in a spot where they're not really used to being? And nobody's. I'm not saying we're even going to get remotely in the neighborhood of like a Jimbo sort of implosion from this team, but I do think it'll be interesting to see how Saban gets his guys to come out and play hard um, when there's really not much on the line besides, for the underclassmen who aren't going to the NFL, potential starting spots for next year. So I think that's the most interesting part of this game. The thing I'll be most interested to see is what kind of attitude does Alabama show.
Yeah, I think it'll be interesting. I really don't have a pick for this. I would probably lean the over given the amount of tickets and cash on the over. Um, but I think it'll be interesting. I don't think a New Year's Six bowl is anything to like scoff at. I think Bama is still very much in contention for one of those. So I think there is still something to play for, even if you are. I mean, if you're an Alabama fan, right, this is a down year. If you are anybody else who is not accustomed to the winning that Alabama has done. Alabama still has a good season with good wins. It just wasn't their year. So I do think Alabama still has something to play for. And like you said, ostensibly 3/4, if not 4/5 of that team is playing for a starting spot. So you can't just quit on the season. Um, Ole Miss, I think, has more to lose here. Hungry Dogs kind of run faster. Ole Miss will be at home. It wouldn't shock me if Ole Miss pulled out a win if like Alabama just really does spiral, although we haven't really ever seen that under Nick Saban. Um, but I believe in the aggression to the mean kind of thing, so it's bound to happen eventually. Um, but we'll see. I think it'll be a good matchup. I think it'll be a fun game. Obviously, not as much playoff implication as we once maybe thought it would have, but who knows? But yeah, I kind of like the over, like you were saying.
Yeah,
Um,
I think it's interesting because when you look at it, Alabama, Ole Miss's resume doesn't say they should be in this game, which I think is why the line is so high, even though they're at home. Because Ole Miss lost to LSU by 25 on the road. Now, granted, it's going to LSU, but that's an ass whooping. And Alabama has lost to two of the top six teams in the country by a combined 4 points. So when you think about it that way, this shouldn't be close, but it will be interesting. Like I think it all depends on how Alabama shows up. That's why I wouldn't touch this spread because you could get a completely dominant Alabama performance where they show up very angry and they drag Ole Miss up and down the field. And this everybody will look like idiots because right now everybody's on Ole Miss thinking
mhm.
that Alabama's dead and buried, and I'm never willing to go
Barry,
that
Alabama.
far with Nick Saban in charge of that program.
That's fair. That's fair. Okay. Our next game, we are going outside of the Power Five for a ranked matchup between UCF and Tulane. Tulane's -2 at home. Over under is 54.5, 330 kick. For those of you who don't watch non-Power Five football, this is probably the biggest matchup in Tulane's history, at least in the past 20 years. Currently leading the American Athletic Conference. UCF is number 2, tied with Cincinnati at 7-2 overall and 4-1 in the conference. So big game at Tulane. I will be there. Looking forward to it. But it should be a great time. I think off comment. I think College Game Day missed one by not coming to UCF Tulane. But
Where
I,
are
I
they?
they're at Tulane, so they're in New Orleans.
No. Where's game day?
They're going to the TCU Texas game,
Hmm.
which
I get it.
I can see it. They did go to Texas for the Alabama game, so that's my only qualm is they're going back to Texas
Yeah,
twice in a
that's
year. It's a bit weird.
yeah.
Anyway,
I agree with
I'll get off my high horse. I do like Tulane in this game. Tulane's defense has been playing on fire. I think, with the exception of the Memphis second half, where they were leading 38-0 and kind of just literally sleptwalked through the rest of the game, and still won and covered. I think Tulane's been playing really well. I think their defense has been playing really well. If you haven't been watching Tulane, Pratt, who is their quarterback, has done a phenomenal job of throwing the ball this year. You know, the defense plays on fire in most games. They've had a couple like really close games, but Tulane's been playing their ass off. I don't think USC is anything or UCF is anything to blink at. They're a very good team. They still have the opportunity here to come out on top of the AAC if they beat Tulane and then run the table. They'll be in the championship game. So I think it'll be interesting. But I think Tulane at home. I think they come out. This is the biggest game in Tulane football program probably in the next in the last 20 years for sure, with a double ranked matchup because Tulane hasn't been ranked since like 91 or 94, something like that. So it'll be interesting to see. But I like Tulane -2 here. I don't know if you have another pick, Mike.
No, I would because I'll add it. I'll take off.
Tulane, by the way, Tulane I think is 8-1 against the spread this year. They've been a covering machine.
Uh, I'm I'm adding it one because it's your school. Two, because of a combination of two things. One, you touched on it. Tulane's defense playing well. They're finding ways to win games. They've played better teams and they've beaten better teams. Kansas State and Houston are better than anybody that UCF has played. And
Yeah, UCF's statement win was Cincinnati
yes,
2 weeks ago.
and that was what I was going to say as my final point is that in that game, you would think Gus Malzahn coach team UCF offense, this is going to be a styles make fights sort of game. UCF in that game against Cincinnati, they won 25-21, went way under. But the more interesting point was that through three quarters, the score was 13-12, Cincinnati. So not the same team, but a team that should be known for their offense didn't play offense, and that game was at home. So going on the road to Tulane in a game your team will be fired up for. I like Tulane -2.
Should be a fun one. Should be a good one. Our next ranked matchup: Washington at Oregon. Oregon's -13.5. Over under 72.5. Kickoff is at 7 p.m. Mike, I'll let you go first on this one.
Yeah. When I drive to Virginia to place any wagers because it's illegal in North Carolina, I will be betting on Oregon minus 13
Hmm.
and a half. The
All right.
lot Oregon's at home. They need to win every game. They need to continue to convince. I think Dan, like I've talked about, I've gushed over Dan Lanning. I think he's doing a tremendous job, especially with where this team started this year. But I also think that they know that they can't take their foot off the brake. And the other side of the coin is that we all saw what UCLA did to this Washington team.
Mm-hmm.
And the only thing that has changed since that performance and now is time. Washington, in the meantime, has played the worst of uh, the Pac 12 and has not won any of those games convincingly. After they played UCLA, they lost at Arizona State, who that was the first win for their interim coach. Then they got Arizona at home. They only won by 10. Then they went to Cal. They only won by 7. and then they got Oregon State at home, a game they won by a field goal. So Oregon State's a good win. Game was at home. This is a tremendous step up in competition for a Washington team that the last time everybody watched this team play on national TV in a big spot, we said Michael Penix still stinks. This team stinks. They're not good. Oregon should win this game in a big way. They know they have to keep making statements to overcome their loss to Georgia at the beginning of the year. This should be Oregon minus 13 now.
Okay, I like it. I also have a different pick for this, but similar um, vein. Uh, 72 and a half points is way too many points for this game, in my opinion. I don't know that Washington is going to score 30 plus points, and I see that as the way to cover the spread if you're looking at the over under. So I like under 72 and a half. The only time Oregon's put up 70 points this year was at Eastern Washington, which is a FCS school. Otherwise, they put up consistently about 40 to 45 points. So that's important, right? Because you're going to assume that they're not doing more than that in there if they beat Washington, right? So do you think Washington is going to score 30 if Oregon puts up, 45 and covers to get the over? My answer is no. I don't think Washington gets 30. I could see Oregon getting 40 to 45. I just don't see Washington scoring over 28. So about 4 touchdowns. So I'm going to take the under in this game, 72 and a half. I just Oregon could put up a boatload and Washington could shit the bed, and you're still not going to see anything out of the ordinary. The only time Oregon has hit over 72 points this year would be number 9 UCLA at Oregon, and then Oregon at Washington State. Aside from the game where they put up 70 on an FCS team, so that's the only time. And I don't think Washington's offense is good enough to put up that many against Oregon. So that's where I kind of lay as the over under there. Our next matchup, another 7 p.m. game, Georgia at Mississippi State, plus 16.5. Over-under is 53.5. It's a 7 p.m. kick, like I said. Mike, who do you like in this one?
I don't have any picks here. The market says take Mississippi State because it's a letdown spot for Georgia coming off a big win against a team that just lost Auburn, but has been otherwise very good this season. That has a good quarterback and a very difficult environment to play in Starkville. I counter that with they are playing the Georgia Bulldogs. So when you look at it like that, and that's all you really need to say, I don't know whether or not they cover 16 and a half, but I think they still win pretty convincingly. Now, you could say they went to Missouri and didn't look good on the road in that game, but I think this is a different animal. I think Georgia gets up for this game. I think they could win. There's a world where they win convincingly, but only by 2 touchdowns. So I add all that up. I don't like where this line sits. If it was inside of 2 scores, obviously, I would also love a Lamborghini and $1 million, but ultimately, this spread, I don't like it. I don't really have an opinion on the total either way, so I'm staying away from this one. I think it's just interesting. The championship teams play games like this, and they should come out and they may struggle a bit. They should still cover. I think there's about a 50-50 split. That's not. I'm not breaking any news here that they do or don't, and that's why I hate where this line is. So I'm not gonna touch it.
I'm taking the over 53.5. Georgia consistently scores about 42 points, with the exception of 2 games when they were at Missouri and when they played Tennessee, who we obviously know is a very good team. Tennessee held them to 27. Missouri held them to 26. So presuming that they bounce back like they have, Georgia scores about 45 points on the low end per week. I think Mississippi State's good. I think they can score. So I could see Georgia score in, 31, and then Mississippi State pulling up the rear scoring like 24. So I can see this becoming not a shootout. I don't want to say shootout, but 53.5 is kind of low for a Georgia team that really can put the mustard on you. And I don't think Mississippi State's going to roll over and die here in this spot. I kind of lean the 16.5, but I don't love it. Obviously, Georgia's really, really, really good, but I could see this game going over 53.5, so I'm taking it over 53.5. Our final game of the week we'll talk about before getting into picks, TCU at Texas. Texas is -7, over under is 65. Mike, run me through what you like here.
I was looking forward to sauntering up to this game and putting money on in Virginia, putting money on TCU at a line closer to Texas -4, and now I've seen it at Texas -7, and with 70% of the heavy bettors going in the opposite direction, taking Texas. Which I think tells me that the way this is viewed is that this is a rat um, because it's so high. Realistically, Texas should only be favored in this game by 4-ish points. The fact that it's 7, it feels like it's inducing the bet on TCU. I'm not going to take the bait. I'm staying away from this one. I think this game's going to be a lot of fun. I think it's going to be incredibly fun to watch. I will sit back and enjoy it and not have to worry about what side of the game I'm actually on.
I don't hate that as a choice. You almost have talked me out of it, but I was going to take TCU +7, just because the hungry dog in this case I feel like runs faster. Of note, the last time Texas covered a spread of over 8 was when they played Oklahoma back in October. So it's been over a month since they've covered a spread like this.
I have a wild strategy for you.
Okay.
If you are so inclined, I will not.
Yeah.
But
Let's
I think
hear
it's
it.
very interesting. Texas is very good at getting out to leads and then blowing them. TCU has come from behind to win almost every game they've played in this year. So, an interesting angle here would be to take the first half Texas line and the second half TCU line. That would
I
be.
like this. Okay, so I'm gonna take. I'll do this. I'm looking up the first half, so I'll take Texas -4 first half, and then I'll see how the game goes, and probably bet TCU against the spread or money line in the second half. I like that strategy. But yeah, I lean TCU here. For this reason, right? Look, Texas is a very good team. I think they're the better team, but I think in this case, one, you're not far from home, right? So Texas TCU fans are going to travel to Texas, to Austin, to watch this game. You're 9-0. You're in the biggest game of the week according to College Game Day, but certainly the biggest game that you have on your schedule because of how this kind of accumulates, right? You go undefeated and you stay undefeated, um, and the wins pile on. But as the wins pile on, each game becomes more important. This is the biggest game they'll have all year based on ranked opponent, and it's the biggest game they'll have all year because if they win this, ostensibly Texas is better than Baylor and Iowa State, and you could see a clear path for TCU to make it to the college football playoff.
Yeah.
So I like TCU +7 in this spot because of the hungry dog runs faster, and these guys are starved for a win, for attention. This is not something you blow. I think emotions are going to be very high. I think this team is going to be locked in. So I lean TCU +7 over nothing else other than my gut is telling me that in this specific case, like Texas is a 3-loss team. They have the whole 8 years planned out for themselves where they're winning 7 championships. I think Texas will be fine. I don't think they'll be as fired up as TCU will for this game. So that's kind of my theory.
I don't hate it.
All right, let's get into picks. Mike, tell me the rest of your picks, and then we'll close her out.
All right, so for a little Friday night special, USC -34 at home against Colorado. Colorado's really bad still. Don't forget that. Take USC even with the large spread. USC should kill them. I will tell you the letdown spot I am taking, and it's Arkansas +3 against LSU. Early game, 11 local kickoff at Arkansas. They have nothing left to play for besides this game. They just lost to Liberty. KJ Jefferson's a good quarterback. I still don't think LSU is particularly that great. I thought they played well against Bama, but I don't think they've looked dominant in the way, besides maybe the Ole Miss game. Arkansas should be able to hang in this game. I think they might win it outright and really shake up the West. But I like Arkansas to cover. This should be a really close game. Bounce back spot, Tennessee -20.5. They get Missouri at home. If this game was 2 weeks ago, Tennessee would have been favored by 30. Take Tennessee -20 here. Another letdown spot, Navy +16.5 at home against Notre Dame. Notre Dame has played down to every inferior opponent they've played this year. Especially coming off a huge win for Marcus Freeman. They go on the road to Navy, who loves to pick off Notre Dame in these spots. 16.5 is too much. Notre Dame probably wins, doesn't cover. Wisconsin -1.5. They're at Iowa. Iowa keeps fooling people by starting to play offense. I think this is the game where that bubble pops. Wisconsin likes to beat Iowa. This is a rivalry game and a pretty big one out west. Wisconsin is the better team, should win this game. Minnesota -17.5 with Northwestern coming to them. This is a reaction line. I don't know why it's so low. Northwestern played a tough game against Ohio State, but we talked about how the weather factored in there. Minnesota gets them at home. The weather will not be as bad for this game. Minnesota's a way better team. Northwestern stinks. Take Minnesota. We talked about Tulane -2. South Carolina +8 at Florida. They love to beat Florida, and Florida's not good. They beat a Texas A&M team that basically had nobody available because they all had the flu last week, which is why I think this line is where it is. South Carolina also beat Texas A&M, and South Carolina kicked the crap out of Florida last year at home. I think they do it again. I think they get up for this game and they beat Florida, possibly straight up, but I think they will cover the spread. This should be a close game. I'm riding my team again. UNC +3.5 at Wake Forest. I think that UNC is a little disrespected in this spot. I think they're relying on the fact that Sam Hartman is a senior quarterback and is more experienced. But Drake May, I saw Dane Brugler, who is a college football writer for The Athletic, who does NFL draft scouting, said that he might have Drake May #1 in this quarterback class coming out right now if he was in this class. That's how good Drake May has been this year. I think people are sleeping on him. And UNC knows that if they get over this hurdle, they're still probably going to the ACC championship game anyway, but that they get over this hurdle, the rest of their schedule lets down towards NC State, a game they're not going to overlook. They get Georgia Tech, then NC State, with a chance to go to the ACC championship game with one loss. They've been squeaking out wins all year. I think they do it again. UNC covers 3.5. They might win straight up. I think they probably will win straight up. Or we talked about Oregon, and then my last pick, UCLA -19.5. They have Arizona at home. They're way better than Arizona. Take UCLA -19.5.
Okay, I don't hate it. My picks, we talked about TCU +7 at Texas. I'll probably take Texas first half. Again, I think Hungry Dogs run faster. Tulane -2 under in the Oregon Washington game 72.5, over 53.5. Georgia Mississippi State. I also like the following: Cal +13.5 at Oregon State. Oregon State has kind of slumped a little bit. They've been playing down to the level of their competition, and Cal is not the worst team in the Pac-12. They kept it close against UNC. USC. They kept it about at a touchdown. The only time they really got blown out was Oregon. So they've been playing their Pac-12 competition very tough. They even kept it close against Notre Dame. 13.5 against Oregon State, who is unranked. I don't know where the line's coming from. I must be missing an injury, but I've scouted the news. I haven't seen anything. So I like Cal +13.5. Pitt -4 against Virginia. Virginia not very good. Virginia will be at home in this game, but I think Pitt is a little disrespected for some of the losses that they've had as of late. I think we were very high on Pitt early on in the season. They kept Tennessee within 7, and they've had some pretty good wins. West Virginia, but but their loss to Georgia Tech and Louisville and then UNC following that kind of put a damper on their season. So I think Pitt can come out and beat Virginia away -4. Wisconsin money line at Iowa. I think Wisconsin's better than we thought. I think maybe there was some internal strife regarding their performance, let's call it, with their head coach. So I'm with you. I like Wisconsin money line. I'll probably take them against the spread because I saw that line was moving where you could get +1 on both sides, which is essentially a pick 'em anyway. Iowa State -1 against Oak State. Oklahoma State's looked not great. Iowa State has a little bit more to play for. I think they can go to Oklahoma State and pull out a win. App State -1 against Marshall. Marshall got a little overrated this season because of some of the statement wins they had. App State coming back from that early season start. I think App State goes to Marshall and pulls out a win. You know, again, these two picks I just gave out. They're 1-point spreads, so there's no ties in college football. So do you think App State is going to win the game? If so, then pick App State. South Carolina +8 at Florida. Florida kind of has stumbled. I think South Carolina is still a good team. It's not easy to play in the Swamp, especially as a non-SEC team. But I think South Carolina can go in there and keep it within a touchdown. Baylor -2.5 versus Kansas State, so Baylor at home. I think Baylor's picking up steam towards the end of the season. I think they'll beat Kansas State. And then Kansas +3.5 at Texas Tech. Kansas has been playing teams tough. I think Texas Tech is an average at best team. So I think you just kind of take the points and then kind of hope that you can see it to the end. And then I have a parlay here. This is late night parlay +120. So it's Oregon State money line. Notice I picked Cal 13.5, but I don't think they'll win outright. Coastal Carolina at home and Illinois at home against Purdue. All of these guys are -250 to -550 in that range, but you parlay all three of them, it's +120. So I'm going to bet on that as well for my parlay of the week. Michael, anything to add for our fans out there?
No. Go Heels.
Well, that has been our show. We will see you hopefully tomorrow or whenever you watch this for our NFL show. We do one show a week for college, one for NFL. Like and subscribe to the YouTube channel, and thanks for watching.